It started as an ordinary evening in our quiet home. My husband, Michael, was away for the week, and the house felt unusually serene. But tonight, that stillness carried an undertone I couldn't quite place. My 19-year-old stepdaughter, Annie, had always been a bright presence in my life, her laughter like summer sunlight breaking through overcast skies. When she arrived that evening, her usual cheer filled the air, lifting the weight of the day in an instant. We decided to spend the evening catching up, reminiscing over glasses of wine. The hours melted away as stories flowed freely, accompanied by light-hearted teasing and a closeness I hadn't felt in a long time. It felt comforting, almost nostalgic, like we were old friends rediscovering each other. But as the night deepened, so did the atmosphere around us. The easy comfort we shared began to shift into something I couldn't quite name. We moved to the couch, wrapping ourselves in blankets as an old movie played softly in the background. Annie leaned into me, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. It was a natural gesture, one she'd done before. But this time something was different. Her warmth against my side sent a flicker of unfamiliar feelings through me, a sensation I couldn't explain and didn't want to confront. Her laughter quieted as the movie played on. I turned to look at her, and our faces were closer than I expected. Her gaze lingered, soft but intent, as if searching for something unspoken. My breath caught in my throat, and before I could react, her lips brushed mine. It was fleeting like the ghost of a kiss, but it left my mind spinning. I pulled back, startled, and saw her wide, startled eyes, her face flushed with a mixture of fear and regret. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, her voice trembling. I opened my mouth to respond, but words failed me. Instead, I found my hand lifting instinctively, my fingers grazing her cheek in a soft, reassuring touch. Her apologies stopped, the air between us thick with emotions I couldn't fully understand. As our gazes locked, something shifted. Her vulnerability mirrored my own, and without thinking, I leaned in again, closing the distance between us. The second kiss wasn't an accident. It wasn't rushed or hesitant. It was deliberate, slow, and filled with an unspoken understanding. Her lips were soft, trembling slightly, and her touch was careful, as though afraid to break the fragile moment we had stumbled into. My heart raced, a sensation I hadn't felt in years, and I found myself leaning into the connection, letting it draw me closer. Her touch began tentatively, her fingers grazing my neck with a feather-light stroke that sent a shiver rippling through me. The intimacy of the moment wasn't in the physicality. It was in the vulnerability, the quiet acknowledgement of a bond we didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. Every glance, every subtle movement carried a weight that left me breathless. Annie's presence had always been vibrant and refreshing, but now it felt different, charged. As her fingertips traced the line of my collarbone, a warmth spread through me, igniting something I thought had long been dormant. Her touch wasn't hurried, it was exploratory, almost reverent, as though she was discovering me for the first time. And I, too, found myself captivated by her every movement, her every expression. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice filled with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. I nodded, my words caught in my throat. How could I explain what I was feeling when I didn't fully understand it myself? I let my actions speak instead, brushing a strand of hair from her face and allowing my fingers to linger. The softness of her skin, the way her breath hitched at my touch, it was all-consuming. She leaned in closer, her hair brushing against my cheek, and the world around us seemed to fall away. The distant hum of the movie playing on the television, the faint sounds of the city outside, all of it faded into irrelevance. In that moment, there was only her and the quiet intensity that bound us together. As our breaths mingled, I hesitated, the weight of reality pressing down on me. "Annie," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. This isn't something we should." She placed a finger gently over my lips, silencing me. "I know," she said, her eyes glistening with a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "But it feels right." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Against every rational thought, I couldn't deny the truth in them. It wasn't right, not in the conventional sense, but it felt undeniable, inevitable. I closed my eyes, letting myself surrender to the pull of the moment, and when her lips met mine again, I didn't resist. The kiss deepened, carrying with it an intensity that left me trembling. Her touch grew bolder, her hands finding their way to the small of my back. The warmth of her skin against mine was grounding, anchoring me in a moment that felt both surreal and achingly real. I couldn't tell where her touch ended and mine began, our movements intertwined in a dance of discovery and surrender. Every brush of her fingers, Every press of her lips was filled with an unspoken promise. A shared understanding that this moment, however fleeting, was ours alone. Time seemed to stretch, seconds melting into minutes as we explored the fragile connection we had uncovered. When we finally pulled apart, the room was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that carried more meaning than words ever could. Annie looked at me, her cheeks flushed and her eyes searching mine. "I'm sorry if I've crossed a line," she said softly, her voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to find the right words. It's not just you," I admitted, my voice heavy with emotion. "I'm just as much a part of this." Her lips curved into a small, tentative smile. "Then maybe it's not a line we crossed. Maybe it's just something we found." Her words left me breathless, torn between the weight of what had happened and the undeniable pull of what we had shared. I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to simply be. The weight of the moment lingered long after our words fell silent. I could feel the warmth of her hand in mine, a grounding force amidst the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and a growing awareness of the line we had blurred. But none of it seemed to matter when she was this close, her presence anchoring me to the here and now. "Should we talk about this?" Annie asked softly, her voice hesitant. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. What could I say? That this was wrong? That it couldn't happen again? The truth was, I didn't know how to define what had just unfolded between us. "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I need some time." She nodded, her expression a mix of understanding and sadness. "I get that," she said, her fingers brushing lightly against mine before she pulled away. "But please don't shut me out." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I didn't want to shut her out, but I also didn't know how to navigate the complicated emotions this moment had unearthed. "I won't," I promised, though the uncertainty in my voice betrayed me. "I just need to figure out what this means." She gave me a small, tentative smile. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Annie excused herself to her room, leaving me alone in the living room with nothing but my thoughts for company. I stared at the television, the movie still playing in the background, but I couldn't focus on the images flickering across the screen. My mind kept returning to her. Her touch, her gaze, the way her presence seemed to fill the room even when she wasn't there. By the time I finally made my way to bed, the house was quiet. I paused outside her door, tempted to knock, to say something, anything, but the words eluded me. Instead, I turned away, retreating to the sanctuary of my bedroom. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I was met with flashes of the evening. Her smile, her touch, the way she had looked at me with such unguarded vulnerability. The next morning, the air between us felt different. Not tense exactly, but charged with an unspoken understanding. She greeted me with her usual cheerfulness, though there was a subtle hesitancy in her voice. I responded in kind, keeping my tone light, but every glance, every shared moment felt like it carried a weight we were both trying to ignore. As the days turned into weeks, we settled into a fragile rhythm. We didn't talk about what had happened that night, but it lingered between us, unspoken but undeniable. Annie seemed content to let me take the lead, her patience and understanding a silent reassurance. And while I tried to focus on the day-to-day tasks of life, I couldn't help but notice the way her presence continued to draw me in, like a moth to a flame. One evening, as we sat together at the dinner table, she broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice cautious. "About us." I froze, my fork hovering midair. "Annie, I know," she said quickly, cutting me off. "I know it's complicated, and I know it's probably not what you want to hear. But I need to say it." I set my fork down, my appetite suddenly gone. "Okay," I said, my voice steady despite the unease building inside me. "Say what you need to say." She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet intensity. "I don't regret what happened," she said. "I know it wasn't planned, and I know it's messy, but it felt real. And I think you felt it too." Her honesty left me speechless. She was right, of course. I had felt it, the connection, the pull, the undeniable chemistry that had drawn us together that night. But acknowledging it felt like opening a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through. "Annie," I paused, struggling to find the right words. "What happened that night, it can't happen again. It was a moment of weakness, and I let myself get swept up in it. But it's not something we can build on." She flinched at my words, the hurt flashing briefly in her eyes before she nodded. "I understand," she said softly, her voice trembling. I needed you to know how I feel. Her vulnerability left me aching, torn between the desire to comfort her and the need to establish boundaries. I care about you, I said finally. More than you probably realize. But it's too complicated. It's not fair to either of us. She nodded again, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Thank you for being honest, she said. I hope we can still be close, even if it's not the way I want. Her words were a painful reminder of the line we had crossed and the impossibility of turning back. We will, I promised, though I wasn't sure how we would navigate the delicate balance we now found ourselves in. It'll just take time. As the evening wore on, I found myself replaying our conversation in my mind, wondering if I had said the right things, made the right choices. But one thing was certain. The connection we had shared that night had changed everything. And while I didn't know what the future held, I knew that we would face it together, one step at a time. The days that followed were a fragile dance of avoidance and cautious interaction. We didn't speak about that night or the conversation at the dinner table. Instead, we tiptoed around each other, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy that neither of us fully felt. Every shared moment seemed loaded, every glance charged with the weight of what had been left unsaid. Annie threw herself into her routines with a determination that seemed almost forced. She took up new hobbies, spent more time with friends, and often retreated to her room for hours on end. I couldn't tell if she was trying to distract herself or give me space, or both. Either way, I noticed her bright energy had dimmed. The vibrant girl who used to fill the house with laughter now carried a quiet sadness in her eyes, a heaviness she tried but failed to hide. For my part, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I kept busy, filling my days with chores and work, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to that night. But no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the memory lingered, surfacing in quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. I told myself I had done the right thing by drawing boundaries, but the guilt and longing that swirled inside me suggested otherwise. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the living room, Annie came in and sat down on the couch. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me in silence. I could feel her eyes on me, and the air between us grew heavier with each passing second. "Mom," she said finally, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" I froze, the shirt in my hands falling to my lap. "Of course," I said, forcing a calmness I didn't feel. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of a cushion. "I know things have been weird between us," she began. "And I know it's my fault. I don't want to lose you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I set the shirt aside and turned to face her fully. "Annie, you're not going to lose me," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "No matter what's happened, no matter how complicated things feel, I'll always be here for you." Her eyes filled with tears and she looked away, blinking rapidly. I feel like I ruined everything," she admitted. "I don't know how to fix this." I reached out, placing a hand on hers. "You didn't ruin everything," I said softly. "We're still figuring things out, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward. It'll take time, but we'll get there." She nodded, her tears spilling over despite her efforts to hold them back. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything." Her vulnerability broke something inside me, and I felt my own tears threatening to fall. "I'm sorry too," I said, my voice trembling. "For not handling things better. I should have been clearer, stronger. But we'll get through this. Together." For the first time in weeks, the tension between us seemed to ease. We sat there for a while, talking about everything and nothing, like we used to before everything had changed. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step, a small, fragile step toward healing. But healing didn't come easily. There were still moments when the weight of what had happened felt unbearable. I found myself questioning every interaction, second-guessing every word I spoke to her. And though Annie tried her best to move forward, I could see the shadow of regret lingering over her. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed help, someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of the tangled emotions I was carrying. The next morning, I reached out to a therapist, scheduling my first session for the following week. Therapy was a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. It gave me a safe space to unpack my feelings, to confront the guilt, confusion, and lingering longing that had been eating away at me. My therapist helped me see that healing wasn't about pretending the past hadn't happened. It was about acknowledging it, learning from it, and finding a way to move forward. Annie, too, began to find her footing again. She started spending more time outside the house, reconnecting with old friends, and even joining a local art class. Slowly, her spark began to return, and I saw glimpses of the vibrant girl she had always been. It wasn't the same as before, how could it be? But it was progress. As the weeks turned into months, the air in the house began to feel lighter. We were rebuilding, piece by piece, learning how to exist together in a way that felt healthy and respectful. There were still moments of awkwardness, of course, moments when a glance lingered too long or a touch felt too familiar. But we were learning, and that was what mattered. One evening, as we sat together watching a movie, Annie turned to me with a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" I asked, surprised. "For not giving up on me," she said. "For being here, even when it was hard." Her words brought tears to my eyes, and I reached out to take her hand. "I'll always be here," I said. "No matter what." In that moment, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was enough, a reminder that love, even when tested, can endure. The months that followed brought a fragile sense of peace to our home. It wasn't the same as it had been before, and perhaps it never would be, but there was a quiet understanding between us now, a mutual recognition of the work it had taken to move forward. For me, the journey toward healing was as much about understanding myself as it was about repairing my relationship with Annie. Therapy helped me see the mistakes I'd made, the ways I had allowed my emotions to cloud my judgment, the boundaries I had blurred when I should have been stronger. It wasn't easy to confront these truths, but it was necessary. Growth, I learned, often comes from discomfort. Annie, too, had grown in ways I hadn't expected. She became more independent, more self-aware. She poured her energy into her art, creating pieces that were as vibrant and expressive as she was. Watching her rediscover her passions reminded me of the resilience we both shared, a quiet strength that had carried us through the darkest moments. One evening, as we sat together in the kitchen, Annie broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said, her voice steady. "And I want you to know, I don't take any of it lightly. I've learned so much from this, and I want to be better, for you, for myself." Her words brought a lump to my throat. "You already are," I said softly. "We both are. And I'm proud of you." She smiled, and for the first time in a long while it felt genuine. "I'm proud of us," she said, "for not giving up." That conversation stayed with me, a reminder of how far we had come. It wasn't just about moving past what had happened. It was about finding a way to carry it with us without letting it define us. We had built something new out of the wreckage, something imperfect but real. I also learned to forgive myself. For so long, I had carried the weight of guilt, believing I had failed as a mother, as a person. But forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about excusing what had happened. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and letting go of the shame that kept me tethered to the past. Through it all, I discovered the power of love, not the perfect fairy tale kind, but the messy, complicated love that endures through hardship. The kind that forces you to confront your flaws and teaches you to grow. Annie and I had tested the boundaries of our relationship in ways I never thought possible, but we had also found a depth of understanding that made us stronger. One morning, as the sun streamed through the kitchen window, I watched Annie laugh over her coffee, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in months. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental, a testament to the resilience of the human heart. We had been through the fire, and though we were still healing, we had emerged with a bond that could weather even the hardest storms. In the end, I learned that life is rarely black and white. It's filled with shades of gray, moments of uncertainty, and decisions that challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself. But it's also filled with opportunities for growth, for connection, and for forgiveness. What happened between Annie and me will always be a part of our story, but it doesn't have to define us. We are more than our mistakes. We are the choices we make in the aftermath, the choice to forgive, to love, and to move forward. As I looked at her that morning, her laughter filling the room, I felt a quiet sense of hope. We weren't perfect, but we were trying, and sometimes that's enough. If you were in her position, could you forgive yourself or someone you love for crossing a line? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that explore the complexities of love, trust, and redemption. Stay tuned. Our next story will take you on a journey that's even more thought-provoking. You won't want to miss it.